Hi, everyone. This is Student Created Course Materials for Enhanced Learning. My name is Sally Potter, and I am a faculty member in the EMLS Linguistics Department. I mostly teach linguistics, and I'm also the OER faculty coordinator. Okay, so here's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to work on defining open pedagogy. So that is really the term, the concept that this is all about, open pedagogy or open pedagogical practices. And then we're going to talk about the benefits of open pedagogy, why you should consider using an open pedagogical project in your course. And then we're going to think about how you can apply the concepts of open pedagogy to a course that you teach and collaborate on a project that you can make for your course. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be talking for about 25 minutes, and I'm going to give you a definition, some examples of open pedagogy, and then I will also share an overview of the open pedagogy project that I've been doing in my Linguistics 10 course. Then I'm going to give you some questions and allow you some time to think about an open pedagogy project that you could do for your own course. And then we will share what you came up with. If we don't get a few more people, we'll just all share together. If we do get a few more people joining us, and I'll put you in some breakout rooms so you can discuss. And then we will do like a final discussion, answer questions at the very end. Okay, so let's start with some definitions of open pedagogy, what that is. I got some help from ChatGPT to give me a pretty good definition here, so I'll just go ahead and read that. Open pedagogy is an educational approach that emphasizes student collaboration, engagement, and the co-creation of knowledge, often using open educational resources and other openly licensed materials. Although you're going to see that with my project, I use a lot of more not openly licensed materials, but free sources, websites, and particularly the information and the articles and books that are on the library databases. So those are not openly licensed, but they are free for our students to use. Unlike traditional teaching methods where content is passively consumed, open pedagogy invites students to actively participate in creating, adapting, or sharing content, thus making learning more interactive and meaningful. And then just a couple of other good definitions that I found. One from EdTechnica, a set of teaching practices built on the foundation of the open education community's shared values, including but not limited to student agency, sharing, diversity and inclusion, peer learning, renewable assignments, co-creation, and active learning. It most often refers to student involvement in the development of course creation in the form of renewable assignments, or the creation or adaptation of OER. And I want to stop right there and talk about what I mean by renewable, what they mean by renewable assignments. So in your traditional courses, your traditional kind of assessments, they're called disposable assessments or disposable assignments. What that means is that you assign an essay, a research paper, a speech, some kind of project to the students in your class. They work on it during that semester, and then when the semester is over, that's the end. The assignment is just kind of thrown away. It's never looked at again. Open pedagogy is different though. So the idea is that the assignments or that the products that students create during the semester class, that lives on beyond just the time and the scope of the class. Another last definition here on this page from Open Pedagogy Approaches, which is a book that is actually freely available online if you want to search for it. And it has a lot of articles and examples of different professors and instructors using open pedagogy projects in their courses. So this one says, involves engaging students in the creation of knowledge and learning rather than simply consuming it, emphasizes community cooperation and the sharing of resources, ideas, and power. So the whole idea behind it is that the students are more engaged because they are creating something and not just something that is disposable that's going to be thrown away. This is something that is higher stakes than that because it's going to live on beyond just the scope of your class, either given to another class during the same semester or a subsequent semester, or even publicly shared. Okay, so some features of open pedagogy. And again, I asked ChatGPT for some help with this and kind of edit it down. But one is accessibility and sharing. So utilizing openly licensed materials that are freely accessible, adaptable, shareable, promoting a culture of sharing knowledge and resources. This idea of open pedagogy is very strongly linked to OER and openly licensed materials and free materials. Collaborative learning, encouraging students to co-create content, collaborate on projects, and contribute to the knowledge pool, fostering a sense of ownership and engagement in their learning process. And so this is the idea that the students are creating something together. There's a community that's created in your course. Between the students, among the students, they feel responsible to each other, and it's a kind of a motivator for them. Transparency and inclusion, ensuring that educational practices and materials are transparent and inclusive, allowing for diverse perspectives and equitable access to learning opportunities. So this sort of breaks down the wall between instructor and student. Everyone is kind of learning together, and so the students get a look at how learning resources are created. They have a hand in creating the resources for the course or for other students and other courses. So it's more transparent. Authentic assessment, moving away from traditional assessments to more authentic real-world tasks that allow students to demonstrate their learning in meaningful ways. And again, the assessments are more like what they would do in the real world and less like what they're used to in traditional classes. And then a sustainable impact, creating resources and projects that have lasting value beyond the classroom, contributing to the broader educational community and society. So the idea is that the students are creating something that is useful, that can be used by someone else, whether it's an instructor, professor, or another group of students, or someone out in the public. Okay. Let me just pause here for any questions that you might have. And let me see if there's anything in the chat. Nope. Any questions about anything so far? Okay. Okay. So, why am I encouraging you to do an open pedagogy project in your class? This is maybe a little bit of work, a little bit more work for us as instructors to set something like this up. And it's kind of going away from, the traditional ways that we were taught. So it's kind of a little bit of a different way of thinking. But some of the things that happen are students are more motivated because, again, this is not a disposable assignment. They feel more responsible. They feel like their work is going to have a lasting impact. And so they are going to have more of a motivation to complete the project. And I have seen this in action. I have seen students who don't do much of the other homework really get engaged and involved with the Open Pedagogy Project. It empowers students as co-creators to feel ownership of the resource. This is something that they can look back on. They can even put it in a resume. And they're going to have this thing beyond the classroom. It's a relevant and authentic learning in a real life application. So again, this is more like what they would be doing in the real world, not necessarily in a college classroom. The collaboration cultivates a sense of community. So I know I am always trying to build community in my classes and really have like a sense of us as a group and the things that we care about. And so this is a good way to really build that community up, and the students really feel responsible to each other. The cultural value of collective effort. This supports impacted student groups. So the idea of doing a collective project where all the students are working together, this aligns with some of the cultural values from some of our marginalized and impacted student populations, some of those ethnic and racial groups that we are really trying to focus on to help support them. This type of collective project is more in line with some of those cultural values. And then, of course, free and accessible resources. When students don't have to purchase resources, the resources are free or they're openly licensed. It promotes economic justice. Okay, so let me just quickly tell you about my Linguistics 10 project that I've been doing for a couple semesters now. I used to do a traditional research paper, go through the course, and then towards the end, I would introduce the research paper. Students would get to pick the topic, their project that they wanted to research. Then they would do their research paper, and then I would give them a grade, and then then that would be it. So it is similar to that, and then they can pick whatever topic they're interested in that has to do with linguistics. And I give them the choice. They can work with a partner or they can work individually. Most of the students that I've had so far have chosen to work individually. A few will partner up. They will find, either a friend or someone who, they're kind of sitting next to during the semester, and they have, the same interest, and then they, partner up. But for the most part, they work individually. The way that I run my class is the first 6 weeks is really kind of the introduction to language, the properties of human language, how human language differs from animal communication, and the different layers and the core areas of linguistics. So the first 6 weeks, they get a good background in that. And then, and I show videos and talk about different areas of the class that we're going to get into for the rest of the course. So it gives them an idea to think about what topic they want to choose. Then I present them with a list of possible topics, and they're pretty broad. So, usually they can find something from that list that they're interested in. And then after about week 6, we spend approximately 50% of our in-class time working on the project. So my class meets on Tuesday, Thursdays, usually 1 day a week. We just do regular class, activities, group work, I lecture a little bit. And then the other day is a time to do some aspect of the Open Pedagogy project. So I ask the students to bring their laptops if they have them. If not, we have a few loaner laptops for our department that I can give a couple students. And so we do things like, searching, doing some creating on the website, working with ChatGPT a little bit. Also, I ask them some check-in questions, and I will give you more information on that a little bit later. Okay, so what the project actually is a website that I created, and it's a Google site, which is really, really easy to use. Our FCC instructional designer, Sue Yang, just gave me a crash course in that. She did workshops on that this semester. But last semester I had her help me set it up. She actually came into my class and did a little tutorial for the students. But at this point, I can show them everything that they need. It's really easy to use. It's very much like Google Docs, but you're just creating a website, and they have templates and things that are really, really easy to work with. I also show a couple of short YouTube tutorials, and then I will give links to longer tutorials on YouTube about how to work with Google Sites. Students, for the most part, are more tech savvy than I am, so this is not really a problem for them. They can do this really well, and some of them get really creative on designing their website. I also give them just a little bit of Creative Commons training, so I do show them where they can find openly licensed sources. I explain to them what the open licenses mean, if they're mixing with different sources, how to handle that. For the most part, though, there is no Linguistics 10 OER book that's available, nothing at the introductory level. So most of the students are going to be using sources from the library database. And so even though I want them to know about the Creative Commons sites and openly licensed information that they can find on Google, I take them to the library, and we have a librarian doing a library databases workshop. She walks them through. This is after they have chosen their kind of broad topic. So she helps them with the keywords that they're searching, with what they're kind of to narrow down their topic. And we usually every student walks away from that workshop with at least a couple of good articles that they can use. I also encourage them to sign up for a RAP session, which is a research assistance program session with the librarian. And our students can make appointments to work with the librarian for about 45 minutes to an hour, sit down with them, go through, this is after they, have defined what their topic is and some research questions. Then the librarian can help them, and it's really a really good use of time, because they can find at least a few sources really easily with the librarians. I also do one-on-one student conferences during the semester. So I try to do one at the beginning when they're finalizing their topic and giving them some guidance about where they can look for more sources. The class is a pretty small class. It's in a classroom that only fits 25 people. So that is, fortunately, that's my cap. So I'm able to do meet with students for about 15 minutes each. And I do that in my office instead of having class for the week. And then towards the end of the semester, I meet with them again. And this is just kind of to look at, where they're at. They should be pretty much, know what their design is on their website. And they definitely should know their topic. They should know what they're focusing on, but they may need to find, maybe one or two additional sources if they're missing any information. And it kind of keeps them accountable to me. So if they know that they have to meet with me, then they're more likely to get what they have together before the very last minute. I also do periodic check-ins on the website, on their website progress throughout the semester. So like I said, we usually spend one day a week working on this, and at that time I'll post in Canvas just a really short assignment that just has like a couple questions, asking things like, okay, what is your topic that you've narrowed down? What sources have you found so far? Give me the links to them. And what else are you struggling with? What else do you need? Just to kind of check in and make sure that everybody's on track. And I do that maybe not every single week, but about every other week. I also encourage them to use ChatGPT for a couple of things. So we discussed the ethical implications of using AI on their assignments. And because it's a linguistics course, I have articles about the difference between real human language and what is generated by AI. So we talk about that, and then that leads into, well, how can they use things like ChatGPT to help them. And so we practice with formulating prompts. I tell them they can use it for brainstorming. Definitely a really good use of it is to help them find keywords so that they can search on the library databases. And then once they are pretty much done with the text, writing the text of their assignment, I encourage them to use it for proofreading. Okay, so here is my, let me put this in the chat for you so you can check it out. I think you should be able to get into that. This is what the website looks like. And I've got some different pages here, different areas. The students' work is divided up into two sections: theoretical linguistics and applied linguistics. Those are kind of the two main sections of, or the main areas of linguistics. And so if we go to applied linguistics, then you can see that there are a bunch of links here. And then what these do is these link out to the students' websites. So the students do not have control over our main class website. I'm the only one that has control over that. They create their own website with all of the information on their own page that they've created, and then I link it onto our main website. So a couple things: they have the ability to, control what is on here. They have the ability to turn it on or off if they want. So once they get a grade, if they want to cut off contact, they don't want it to be out in the public, they're more than free to do that. I haven't had any students doing that yet, though. They might just forget about it, but yeah, they all seem like so far they are not shy about sharing their work. So that's good. And then the idea is that these are the topics from my class last semester. This semester I will add the topics that the students submit, and then this list will, over the semesters, this list will get longer and longer. Some of the students may do overlapping assignments, or they may do related topics. And so at that point, I might break this down a little bit more. Instead of just two areas, theoretical and applied, I might have more pages as these start to get more and more crowded. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so that's my project. I wanted to share a few more examples of from some other disciplines that just to kind of give you some ideas, because ultimately I'm going to be asking you to think of a project that your students can do and start to kind of work that out. So for a math class, the students could come up with a problem bank with solutions and explanations that future classes can use. Each group could work on a specific area and include real world applications. And so this could be something that the students work on in one semester, and then you carry it over to the following semester. It could also be something that is, if you're teaching more than one section of a course, maybe, of the same course, maybe one group of students can create something for the other class to work on, and then vice versa. So, it could be something that you do across classes, or you could even do it within the same course. So you could divide the students up into, say, 4 groups, depending on how big, 4 or 6 groups, depending on how big your class is. And then each group could create something for other groups in the class to work on. In a biology class, you could have students create a digital field guide or database of local flora and fauna, including images, description, habitats, relevant ecological data. Over time, the guide can be updated or expanded by successive classes. For art, collaborative curation of a virtual gallery of art movements, each creating visual and written content around specific art techniques, historical context, or analysis of works. They could even include tutorials for techniques based on movements like Impressionism or Cubism. For a history class, a timeline project where students research and add events, figures, artifacts from a particular era. They could focus on specific themes, creating a comprehensive timeline that becomes richer with each class. So you could have different groups in the class focusing on different eras or different themes within a specific era. For an English class, you could create an online anthology or a wiki of literary analysis that covers different themes, character studies, or comparative analysis across texts. So the students could be looking for these different, already published literary analysis essays. They collect them and kind of sort them. And then each cohort, meaning each semester or each course that you do, could add to it or update the entries. And then that could be the anthology that you use for your course in the future. For a computer science class, an open source code repository for beginning projects where students contribute code snippets, mini apps, or tutorials on specific programming concepts. And then each semester, students could improve or add features to these projects. Okay, let me stop for any questions. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to have you think about a project that you could be working on with your class. So before we get to that, does anybody have any questions or anything to talk about right now?
No, we are good.
Okay. Okay. So this is some time for brainstorming, and I'm going to give about 7 minutes. There's 7 questions here. So what I'd like you to do is you can take some notes, because once the 7 minutes is over, you're not going to see this page anymore. So you don't have to answer every single one of these questions, but try to go through as many as you can, okay? So first of all, choose a course that you teach, that you're either teaching right now or you plan to teach in the future. And then, really focus on that one class and then think about applying these questions to that course. So what type of open pedagogy project would work for your course? Could it be something like creating a website, making a wiki, developing multimedia resources, depending on your discipline, depending on your students, what type of pedagogy project would work? How would students collaborate and contribute to the project? So this is kind of thinking about the logistics of that. How are you going to get students to work together? What resources or support will the students need to successfully engage in the project? So they're, if it's anything to do with technology, they're going to need the training for that. What kind of materials will they need? What kind of tools will they need in order to be successful at creating the project? Assessment. How will you assess the student contributions and the overall success of the project? So one of the things that I did was the first semester, I had the students work with me, and we created a rubric on which to score their final website projects. I'm using that same rubric for this semester, but I think in the future I might go through the process of having each class work on creating the rubric together with me, so that they feel a little more invested in it, and also that will really help them understand exactly how they are being evaluated. What methods will you use to provide formative feedback to students throughout the project? So this is not the feedback that they would get at the very end when you're giving them their grade. This is going to be, how are you checking on them? How are you doing checks for understanding? How are you going to be doing checks that they are getting the work done, that they're going through step by step, that type of feedback back. So how would you do that? How will you facilitate and encourage peer feedback and collaboration? So in my course, towards the end of the semester, a couple weeks before it's due, I will have students posting their links to their websites on a discussion board in Canvas, and then have their classmates give feedback to at least two of their classmates. Also, at the very end of the semester, they do little mini presentations on their websites during the final meeting day. So that is how I'm engaging the students to kind of collaborate with each other and give feedback to each other on their individual work. And then how will students share their work with a broader audience? Is it going to be published online? Would it be presented to a class or community? So thinking about that, this idea of having the materials that they create be out there in the world, that is just a really important aspect of an open pedagogy project, because it really is the whole idea of it and the whole spirit behind it. Okay, so let me give you, again, about 7 minutes to think about these questions and then go through and answer them, and then we will check back. Okay, that is the time for that. So I have actually made a breakout room, and I'm going to invite you to go into it. Um, Once you get into the room, just discuss what you are thinking of or what you wrote down. You don't necessarily have to follow the questions, although if you would like to, you're not going to have access to them, so you should snap a picture of them right now or do a screenshot on your computer. But I'm not necessarily interested in these exact questions. I'm more interested in what ideas do you have right now for any kind of open pedagogy project for your course, and what will the features of it be? How will you pull it off? How will you get students to collaborate? So just go around and just give everyone a chance to talk about that. We'll take about 10 minutes for that. So I just opened the rooms for you. So go ahead and join the room. Okay, welcome back. Okay, so now I want to know what you were talking about. What projects are you thinking of, and what kinds of things do you need to do, or what do you need to make something like this happen? So who wants to go first?
So Monique, you want to represent our group?
Not really, but I can put me on the
Okay.
spot. But no, I can share about my contribution. I can
Okay.
do my part.
Yeah.
Pretty much we all agreed that we liked the idea of creating a rubric together. So having the students to buy in so that they can see that this is the grade that they earn based on a rubric that they help contribute to. I mentioned that I do an ethics project with my accounting students for the part 2. And when I do those ethic projects, they are strongly encouraged to be group projects. And since the students are online, what I have them do is join their own team or group within Canvas, and they get so many points by doing it by a certain date. So they get to choose their group. And then we do a preliminary draft to make sure that they're not waiting to the last minute to begin the project, and realize that other team members are depending upon their part. And then that's given a portion of the points. And then the final share is shared on one of the discussions, so the rest of the class can see the ethics project in a video presentation format. And then finally, using Google Suite products to allow them to collaborate, as well as a Google form for assessments. So the students are contributing to the grading process and not just leaving it all to me to look at.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So the way that I did the rubric the first time is I had I put in like the prompt and like all the description into Chat GPT, and I said come up with a rubric, and it came up with this rubric that was really, it was just a lot of criteria. It was kind of like a, you know, it's just a little, it was pretty redundant, and it was very heavily weighed on like evaluating their like web design skills, which I mean, honestly, I don't know that much about that. So I can't really, you know, it's like, ooh, that's a pretty picture. You know, that looks cool. You know, that's, I mean, that's about the extent of my knowledge on that. Um, and then so I had that, and then I had the students in class. I put them into groups. I think there were like 3 or 4 groups, and I just said, okay, what, you know, I explained like what criteria are, you know, what the like Likert scale is, kind of gave them a little background in that, and then I said, okay, in each of your groups, come up with the criteria, like what criteria should you be, graded on for this thing. And then they wrote it, we wrote it all up on the board, looked at it, and then I handed out this big old, rubric that Chat GPT made. And, we kind of had like this discussion. A lot of what they came up with in their groups was very similar. They had something that was that ChatGPT did not come up with at all. And I think 3 of the groups came up with this, and it was like, I can't remember, they kind of worded it different ways, but it was like basically aligns with the objectives of the COR, like it's relevant to linguistics, you know. So you can't just do a project on any old thing that you want. It has to be within the, like the COR objectives of the course, or whatever. And so, yeah, so that was something that was added, and then, pared way down some of the other stuff. And then I took all that information, and then I made another draft, and then we looked at that together, and, they gave me their feedback, and there was a couple things that we kind of tweaked, and okay, mainly the points, like this should have more points, that should have fewer points, and just had a discussion. And that's how we came up with this rubric. I think it's a really good rubric. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else have any, like, what are other projects that you're thinking of doing for your courses? Vanessa, do you have anything? I don't know what you teach.
Hi, I teach biology. So something that I kind of discussed, I was also with Monique,
Yeah.
but I discussed doing like a project on a core concept in the class. So something like transcription and translation, where they have to do like an animation showing that concept. And I would also do like a check-in, like a draft, but also check in with the group, but also with the students individually. Because I think it's one thing to meet with students as a group versus one-on-one. Just in case like there's any issues, I can go ahead and address it with the student privately, and nobody has to feel like under pressure. And then with that initial draft, I would go ahead and leave feedback on that draft and see like basically where they could improve and things like that. But with the draft, what I would do is I would require that the students submit their respective drafts, so what their components of the project were, to ensure that everyone's contributing, and then an overall draft of the project.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. How about you, Usha? Do you have any ideas for something that you could do in your class? Okay.
So, in our group, I was with Vanessa and Monique, and we did discuss about the pedagogy, the student rubric and all. I have not practiced it before. Only once I tried, but I didn't come out, the students didn't come out with a successful rubric. So I presented mine and I asked them to comment on it.
Mhm.
Then I saw them doing some feedback. On their own, they didn't come out well. But when I presented my rubric and I wanted them to comment on it, they were wanting to take away some points on the grammar portion. They said, "Oh, we don't want this much points for the grammar. We are weak in grammar. So we would rather have you move some of the points to the content of the paper." But I don't know how you guys feel about the taking away grammar points. I do weigh it a lot, so I didn't agree on that with them. So let's see what I want your feedback on that.
Yeah, so I think, that's something that you might say, okay, well, we can use this one for like the first draft, but then like for the final draft, then there's going to be more points for mechanics, in that one. That
Okay.
might be something that could be
Yeah.
yeah, but I think it is good for students to have some agency and again I know that they see rubrics, they know what rubrics are because they're used to the teachers evaluate them, but if do they really understand the language that we use on the rubrics? Do they really understand what it all means? Maybe not. And so I think having them do some of the creation of that is really helps them to just understand the whole process a little bit better. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just about at time now. Any last questions or insights or just really anything at all?
No, we are good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that is the end of the presentation for today. And if you want to contact me, please feel free to do that. I love talking about this topic. This is kind of my little pet project right now. And then, of course, anything related to OER, you can ask me questions about that at any time. Yeah. And so have a great rest of your day and a great weekend, and I will see you later.